All right, Alexander, let's talk again about Putin's meeting with Erdogan, but let's focus in on a specific statement that Putin made, which is not connected to Turkey, not connected to the grain deal, not connected to BRICS, but is connected to the Ukraine big counteroffensive. And Putin said that the counteroffensive is not stalled. I think it's a very interesting choice of words. He said it's not stalled, but it looks like it's failed. It looks like it's a failure. And then he followed that up with a statement, let's wait and see how it goes. I hope it continues as is. I'm paraphrasing the second part. The first part, I think I got pretty much right, that quote. And maybe I'll look for it as you're talking. But I think it's very interesting that he said it's not stalled, because it shows to me that Putin understands the narrative that the collective West is trying to put on the big counteroffensive. He understands the spin. The whole, it's a stalled offensive. He understands that. And he said it's a failure. Shoigu said the same thing.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yes. And Shoigu gave a little bit more, in terms of the detail. It wasn't the most detailed statement he's given about the offensive, but he was a bit more granular. And he's now claimed, and, these are Russian claims, so let's be, this is from Shoigu. But he said that the Ukrainian casualty rates have now increased to 66,000. He's not saying dead, he's not just saying 66,000 dead, he's saying casualties. So that presumably includes wounded, just to make that point clear. But anyway, go back to Putin, because Putin, of course, is the more interesting person. So the offensive has failed, but it's not stalled. In other words, it's continuing. In other words, Ukraine can't stop this offensive. That's how I understood this to mean. So it will continue until, well, who knows? And that's essentially, again, what he's saying, because Ukraine has got massive numbers of men, large numbers of machines. I think it was, you said on one of your programs, that the BBC is now also publishing material about the enormous extent of Ukraine's losses in this offensive. I mean, people, in cemeteries and those sort of places. This is on the BBC now. It's starting to appear. So huge Ukrainian losses, huge numbers of machines destroyed, no breakthroughs. Now, this is important again to stress, because once more, I was reading this morning in the Daily Telegraph, that Ukraine is about to break through the final line of defense that the Russians have. I mean, this is actually there today in the Daily Telegraph. And of course, when you go into the article itself, the final Russian line of defense is this village of Verbovoye, which is clearly they haven't captured, but it's not the final line of defense. It's still absolutely, the first line of defense, and they haven't breached it. But, nonetheless, that's what they're saying. So they're talking about the fact that, Ukraine is pushing forward. But what Putin is, it seems to me, saying is it's failed. But the West won't let Ukraine stop. That was the implication that I came away with this. So they're going to have to keep hammering away, incurring more losses, losing more men, losing more machines. There's reports today that a Challenger 2 has been filmed, burning on the steps. The photograph is very indistinct, and my vision problems can't make it impossible for me to identify.
No, it is. Accurately. It is. Forbes confirmed it. Actually,
Forbes confirmed it. Well, there you go. So Challenger 2s now have also burning on the steps, and we can see that they're not really making any progress at all, but they still have to go on. So it's not stalled, it's failing instead. And it also, by talking in that way, by talking about failure rather than a stall, it starts to move the initiative back towards the Russians, because it means that from this moment on, it's not a stalemate anymore. It's a defeat. It's not that Ukraine has reached stalemate. It's that Ukraine is being defeated. And that conceivably, I'm reading things now into what Putin is saying, and maybe I'm going beyond his exact words, but it could be a sign that now the Russians will start making their own moves.
Yeah, let me read you the quote. I found it here. Putin said that the Ukrainian operation is not stalled; it's a failure. And quote: "At least this is how it looks today. Let's see what happens next. I hope this will continue to be the case." It's just like you said. It's almost like Putin is saying it's not stalled. It's a failure, all right. It hasn't stalled, but they're just going to keep on coming. Let's just see tomorrow and the day after what happens. And it's almost like he's not. It doesn't seem like he's so absorbed in the Rabotinia narrative as the West is absorbed in the Rabotinia narrative. I mean, when you read his quote, it seems like he has that. You get the sense that Russia and the Russian military, has everything under control, even if Ukraine advances a kilometer or 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers. It doesn't seem like there's this panic or this worry from Putin.
No, I mean it shows incredible amount of sang-froid. He's just taking it. I mean, it has a teasing quality. I mean, it's essentially. I mean, he's teasing the West. He's teasing the Ukrainians, as he likes to do sometimes. He said, you haven't stalled, you failed. But if you want to carry on trying, it's up to you.
Okay, so I saw the UK Telegraph article as well. What is going on here? I mean, Kirby said 3-4 days ago, Ukraine is getting to the second line of defense. Forbes said that Ukraine has broken through the first line and is moving towards the second line of defense. Now, all of a sudden, 3 days later, the Telegraph is saying that they're at the final defense line. When you read the article, you can tell that they're being very careful with their words. They're saying a key Russian defense line. Nowhere in the article are they saying that Ukraine has breached the 3 main defensive lines that take you all the way to the Sea of Azov. They're very gray about where these lines are located. They don't give, they say Rabotinia, but they don't say Rabotinia's, 60 miles, 60 kilometers away from Melitopol. They just throw this stuff out there to mislead the reader into thinking that Ukraine has just pushed through all of the defensive lines of Russia. But this is obvious deception, but it's also, once again, you get back to this major disconnect.
Yeah.
We're getting information which says one thing and shows one thing, and the Telegraph and Kirby is coming out with information which just doesn't fit.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, what you're describing is deeply manipulative language, and notice that the article again refers to fighting around Rabotino, which of course the Ukrainians are supposed to have captured, and yet the fighting is still going on there. So if you actually unpick it, the detail, to those who know, contradicts the impression that it's trying to convey. But of course, the vast majority of people who read that article, people who read the Daily Telegraph, won't know that because, they're not as invested in time and resources as we are, looking through a magnifying glass at every particular battle. They don't know where Verbovoye is. They don't know where Rabotino is. They don't follow this in the kind of detail that we are. But the impression that it's seeking to give is that there's some kind of big Ukrainian breakthrough, that the final line has been reached. And of course, what is the final line is being constantly, or what is any line of defense, is being constantly adjusted to suit whatever particular narrative you're trying to discuss. So the article says that they're breaching the final line of Russian defense. Then it turns out when you go through the article, it's a line of Russian defense. And when you actually are able to compare that with the maps and the facts on the ground, which, as I said, if you followed the war carefully, as we have, you would know, well, the line of defense that's been talked about is the one that Ukraine has been bashing its head against ever since the offensive began in June. So that's essentially where we are. I mean, they've not really progressed at all since June. But that's the article wants to convey a completely different impression. When people use manipulative language, you need to be very careful about what they're about, because they're trying to persuade you of something that isn't factually true.
Is Verbove the final line of defense?
No.
In the Surovikin line?
No. I mean, it's right. The Surovikin line.
Here's a line from the article, Alexander. One
Yeah.
sentence. Kiev's forces had reached fighting positions near Verbove in southern Zaporozhye region, said George Barros, a Russian analyst at the Institute for the Study of War.
Yes. So the Verbovoye. Now, I've had problems understanding this because there's so many different maps. My understanding is that Verbovoye, which is this village, is almost, there just behind the Surovikin line. So they've reached an area very close to the Surovikin line, and they've actually reached, apparently Verbovoye, it's in sight of where they are. They haven't reached the Surovikin line, and what we're talking about is not just the first line of defense of the Surovikin line, but some of the the barriers somewhat to the west and north of it. So they haven't reached the Surovikin line. They've approached it, which, by the way, they've been doing now for about 2 weeks in this particular area, not elsewhere. And there's at least and there's at least two big further lines behind, which of course they're nowhere close to, and those are kilometers behind them in the rear.
Yeah, it's really frustrating reading these articles. You have to read them like 10 times to try and figure out what the truth is, because they're very, very manipulative and careful with the words they use. For example, the first sentence is, as you said, Ukrainian troops have reached the third and final layer of a key Russian line of defense, according to war analysts. I mean, you have to really think about that sentence. They've reached the final layer of a key Russian line of defense. And then they say about Verdove that Verdove the settlement is a nodal point in the so-called Surovikin line, the main line of Russian defenses in the area. I mean, you just can't read one of these articles one time and get to the truth. No. You have to read it over and over again and pick apart every single word.
Yes.
To try and get to some truth.
Yes. But you see, when they do that, and let me repeat again, when people do this sort of thing, it's because they're having to conceal something. And what they're concealing is the fact that Ukraine is stuck. I mean, that's really what it amounts to. If there had been a real breakthrough, you wouldn't need manipulative language. You'd be able to say it straightforwardly.
Yeah. Okay, so what is the situation? Let's just get to how we see it, how you see it. What does it look like right now?
Well, as of this morning, and as Putin said, this is always a dynamic situation, but as of this morning, it looks to me as if the Ukrainians have still failed to make any real progress at all. Rabotino remains contested. There's still Russian troops either just outside it or in the southern areas, and the Ukrainians have not been able to consolidate control of Rabotino. They've been sending light infantry, and apparently it is only infantry, towards Verbovoye, and this particular defensive belt that we've been talking about near Verbovoye, but they haven't breached it. They certainly haven't managed to capture Verbovoye itself, so they're still in effect stuck. And, the great defensive barriers, the greater part of them, is still well away from where they are. They haven't, in fact, made any significant progress at all. That is my own understanding and reading of the situation.
And elsewhere?
It's the same. It's the same. I'm glad you brought up Bakhmut, because as I've been explaining on my own channel, if you look again, this is information from the Russians, but So, you can argue with it if you wish, but the Russians have been providing what they say are casualty figures for the losses that the Ukrainians have been suffering. You don't have to accept the numbers, but they do perhaps reflect the intensity of the fighting. And if you read Russian accounts, the most intense fighting by far continues to be in and around Bakhmut. That's where the real big battles are happening and where the largest number of people wounded and killed are to be found. And again, despite the fact that there are no great defensive lines in and around Bakhmut because the Russians had no time to build them, it looks as if the Ukrainians are stuck there as well. They've not managed to capture this village of Klesheyevka, which they've been trying to capture since the beginning of May. They're still stuck outside it. Sometimes they advance towards it. Sometimes they're able to capture a few outlying buildings, but they're always pushed back in the end. And there's no progress there at all. And further north, around Kupiansk and the Oskol River, the Russians continue to make progress. And Shoigu was talking about that in these comments he made yesterday.
Okay, let's talk about two more stories real quickly. I want to get your thoughts on the missile strike close to the Romanian border, because it doesn't look like the Zelensky government, they tried to pull another like Polish farmland missile incident. Remember that one where the missile landed in Poland in some farmland, and Zelensky tried to get NATO involved by saying this was Russia hitting at Poland, and it was later proven that this was not the case. Thank God to social media, because photos started to emerge of the actual missile, and that disproved Zelensky's claims. We had kind of the same incident happening close to the border of Romania, but this time we have the Romanian government itself coming out and saying, no, we weren't hit by Russian missiles. There was never a threat. This is just false what the Ukraine government is saying. So I want to get your thoughts on that. And then close out the video by giving your thoughts on the new Minister of Defense, Mr. Umerov. The BBC, they have an article on him, a profile on Mr. Umerov, who is Ukraine's next defense minister. And both the BBC and the NBC, outside of the profile that they give about this guy, the part that really struck me, and he is a pretty weird dude. By the way, there's some pretty weird stuff about him floating around, but whatever. The interesting part about, I think, the articles that are coming out about Umerov is how they're explaining Reznikov's dismissal. And they're doing their very best to say that Reznikov was not dismissed because of the counteroffensive. He was dismissed because of corruption. This is Zelensky's way of cracking down on corruption. In other words, Reznikov was deeply corrupt, and so Zelensky removed him. But it has nothing to do with the progress of the counteroffensive. I think that's pretty interesting how they're scapegoating Reznikov and how they're positioning Reznikov's dismissal. Anyway, your thoughts on Romania,
right?
The missile strike, and then let's just talk a bit about Umerov.
Right. Well, first of all, I mean, the missile strike is important in itself because it shows that the Russians are still going after Ukraine's Black Sea ports, and they are still acting to basically close down those ports to make more shipping from those ports all but impossible. And I've been hearing some reports from ship owners which basically say that increasingly people are very, very wary about sending their ships into this area, and it's completely unsurprising. The key thing, the more important story about this is exactly the one that you said, that the Ukrainians have tried to involve the Romanians in this affair. They've just said that this missile fell. Well, they were trying to imply that this was somehow an attack on Romania. And the Romanians not only denied that, and they said that there was no danger to Romania at all, I got the strong impression that they were actually very annoyed by what the Ukrainians were trying to do. And by the way, this tracks a very strange and unexplained spat between Estonia and Ukraine following the attack on that airbase near Pskov. Pskov, as we know, is much closer to Estonia than it is to Ukraine. There were some rumours that the attack was launched from Estonia. Estonian officials came out and said that the attack on Pskov was absolutely senseless. It made no sense. It achieved nothing. And again, I get the sense that just as the Romanians are very nervous, despite the enormous amount of support that they've been giving to Ukraine, they don't want to be drawn into the war. The Estonians, who've been even more supportive of Ukraine, they don't want to be drawn into the war either. Now, given these very strong statements from Estonia and from Romania, that suggests to me that any ideas that might have existed a few months ago of creating a coalition of the willing, bringing troops into Ukraine from the Baltic states and from Russia, from Romania and other countries, that they're gradually seeping away. People in these countries, in Estonia, in Romania, are now seeing what's actually happening on the battlefields, and they say, we don't want to be involved in all of this. This is turning into a debacle, and we don't want to be drawn into it. We don't want to see our own people killed, and we want to keep the war as far away from us as possible. So I think that is important in that respect. And it also shows that Kiev's attempts to involve these other countries in some way is, either by talking up this attack on the Black Sea port or by launching attacks on air bases, Russian air bases, close to Estonia. None of this is, the people in these countries, Romania and Estonia, are very angered about it. They don't look with favour upon Ukrainian attempts to involve them in that way. Now, very interesting about Reznikov, and I think this is an important story, because Reznikov has been a big figure. I mean, he's been the person who's been going around the various Western countries, getting them to provide the tanks and the armoured vehicles, whatever else he's been. He's been a very, very effective, shall we say, voice. You almost call him a salesman, except, of course, he's not selling anything. He's, not even buying anything, because he's getting most of these weapons from free, as far as I understand. But he's been going around all these Western countries telling them, give us tanks, give us missiles, give us aircraft, give us helicopters, give us everything you have. And the West up to now has been giving them. And he's also had all of these connections with all of these Western ministries, all these defence ministries. We've just seen that Ben Wallace, who's the British Defence Minister, has also been basically sacked. Wallace and Reznikov supposedly got on extremely well, and now they're both gone. And I can't help but think that the reason he's gone, the real reason he's going, is because a lot of people in Europe and perhaps even in the United States feel very, very angry that Reznikov, and by the way, Zaluzhny, sold them a pup. They said, give us the tanks, give us these machines, we'll launch this offensive. The offensive will be this spectacular success. And of course, it hasn't been. And there's all these embarrassing pictures of Leopard 2s and Bradleys and now Challenger 2s burning on the Ukrainian steppes or the southern steppes. And that's made the West very, very angry. And they're very angry with Reznikov. And I suspect they're probably angry with Zaluzhny also. So they wanted Reznikov out, and he's out. They also probably were unhappy with some of the tactics that the Ukrainians have been adopting. The Ukrainians have been attacking in many places. Reznikov has seemed to be supportive of all of this. There's been the fighting in Bakhmut. He's been supportive of the battle in Bakhmut. The West wants Ukraine to concentrate everything that it's got left now on breaking through in Zaporozhye region towards Crimea. So what do? they look around for the one official in the Ukrainian government who is from Crimea. He's a Crimean Tatar, Mr. Umerov. He's a complete civilian. He's got no background in military affairs. He has no historic contacts with the Ukrainian army, but he is from Crimea. He's a Crimean Tatar, so presumably, as far as the West is concerned, he will want to advance on Crimea so he can return to his homeland. That's presumably the calculation there. As you said, he's a complicated man with an interesting background, but, that's less important. And the fact that he's got no military experience or background at all, well, that's not really a problem. You just want him to focus on Crimea. And you talk about corruption. Well, of course, Reznikov, you accuse him of corruption. Probably. It's true. He probably has been corrupt in some ways. If you went after every Ukrainian official who was corrupt, you wouldn't be left with any Ukrainian officials at all. Umerov is head of Ukraine's property fund. I mean, the advantages, I'm not making any allegations now, but the possibilities of corruption there must be many times greater, one would assume. But anyway, that apparently doesn't apply to him. So that's the story about corruption. You don't want to talk about the failed offensive because, as we discussed earlier in this program, well, as far as the West is concerned, the offensive is an amazing success. After all, Kirby is telling us so. And so is the Daily Telegraph in that rather complicated article we were discussing.
Yeah. All right. Let's leave it there. Real quick, your thoughts on the resurfacing, kind of resurfacing, I don't know, of Surovikin.
Yeah, that is in it.
Or is it just the photo?
No, I don't think it's a photo because apparently, first of all, he's in Sochi. It's a photo that was taken in Sochi. And of course, Putin himself is currently in Sochi, where he's been meeting with Erdogan. Now, that might just be coincidence. But the fact that this photo has appeared, that official Russian news agencies are circulating it, shows Surovikin with his wife, and he's in civilian clothes, and he's clearly on leave of some kind. But it clearly is intended to show that he's not under house arrest or anything of that kind, at least not now. And to remind us of the fact that he is there. Now, again, I want to stress, my impression is that Surovikin is an extremely capable military commander, and he created this defense system which has been so effective. He took the correct decision in Kherson region. He's also forceful and dynamic personality. He gave one interview that suggested that. That's the general consensus. I don't know anything at all about Surovikin. I'm not able to judge his military competencies, but the Russian public thinks that he is a brilliant general. And now he's resurfacing, just as there is talk that Russia might be thinking of an offensive of its own. So it seems to me a way of communicating to the general Russian population, no, Surovikin is not in any trouble. He's on his way back. He's resting at the moment in Sochi. He's not in disgrace or anything like that. And we could be seeing him back on the battlefields before very long.
Yeah. I thought the photo was in Moscow. Was it in Sochi? Really?
Apparently it is in Sochi.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. But apparently it is in Sochi.
Yeah,
at least
it's
what
matter.
It doesn't matter. No, I agree. Yeah.
The point is that he's back. He's
back.
That's
back.
That's what the photo's meant to say.
Exactly.
Right?
The convey. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay. We will leave it there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and on Twitter, known as X. Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.